friends, my Maggie here. Today I am bringing you a much requested video that I've actually been working on for a while, and it's 5 tips to live a more sustainable lifestyle. Now, if you know me, if you follow me online, if you watch my other videos, you know that sustainability is something that matters a lot to me. In fact, it's pretty much the turning point of my entire online presence and something that I care a lot about. So for a while, a lot of people have requested that I make some more concrete, tangible tips on how to live a more sustainable lifestyle. Now, the first thing I want to say is that having the time, energy and resources to make more sustainable choices is a privilege that not everyone has. So you should not feel like if you watch this video and you're not able to implement all these things in your life, or maybe you're not able to implement any of them, then don't feel bad. This is not a video that's intended to make anyone feel bad. In fact, this is a video to inspire hope and to hopefully make you feel like you can do something, because of course the truth of the matter is that a big part of the burden of sustainability is on the shoulders of our politicians, our leaders, and the big corporations and companies of the world. And it's easy to feel like you have no power. There's nothing you can do. You just look at Donald Trump and think, how are we doing on that space travel, you know? So I want you to take back that control and feel in control. Of course, it is also paramount to vote for sustainable leaders. Vote for politicians who make the large-scale sustainable decisions. And it's important to vote with your money, because we live in a capitalist society, and where you put your money has a lot of political power. So I would recommend to research a bit where to get the things that you do have to buy, so that you don't accidentally support climate change deniers or people who pollute large quantities of water. So that's the purpose of this video, is to take back that control. And I hope that this can inspire you. I want all of us to stand together. I feel like a lot of people who live sustainably become quite snobby towards people who don't live sustainably. And we as a community have a tendency to alienate people, to judge people, to say, oh my God, aren't you a raw vegan? You know, you're an awful person, without recognizing that if we want to make this change, we need everyone to change a little bit. It's not enough that a very tight group changes a lot. All of us have to make small changes so that we can do this together. So let's dive into the tips. So tip number 1, many of you probably don't want to hear this, but the single biggest impact that one person can make on their CO2 footprint is eating less meat. Ideally, no meat at all. But as I said, being able to live a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle is a privilege not available to everyone, and we have to recognize that. Which is why I think it's so important to have the conversation about just eating less meat, because it makes a huge difference. If you are able to cut down your meat consumption to just 2 meals a week, that's a huge change. Recently, the head of the Danish Vegetarian Union, he said in an interview that if he could change, I think it's 10% of Danes that are vegetarian, if he could change that for no vegetarians, but that everyone only ate meat twice a week, he would do that. And this is the attitude we need. Of course, being vegetarian is great, being vegan is great, and it's great for the environment. But as I said in the intro, what we have to do here is stand together and recognize that we are different and we can't all do the same thing. So if you just can eat less meat, that makes a huge difference, once or twice a week. And what many people don't think about is that it also matters what kind of meat you eat. So eating chicken, for example, is much less harmful on the CO2 scale than eating beef. And of course you can also reduce the amount. So maybe instead of eating like a whole chicken, you can make some sort of casserole or stir fry where there's a little bit of chicken that sort of gives flavor to the rest of the dish, but then you really reduce the amount of meat that you eat. Now, when I first moved out of home, I took a crappy job as a waiter at a restaurant, and I was working for less than minimum wage and I had zero money. And every time I was at work, I would have to, as part of the wage, was that you got dinner from the restaurant, which of course was nice, but there was no vegetarian options. So this is what I mean when I say, you know, I could not afford to turn that meal down at that point. So not everyone is able to live a fully vegan lifestyle, but maybe you can think of ways to reduce your meat intake. I know that a lot of Danish people, they eat meat for lunch too, in their sandwiches, and there are so many great vegetarian options instead. And I don't mean necessarily that you have to buy a lot of fancy meat replacement or fake meat. I eat a ton of mushrooms and green beans and lentils, and there are loads and loads of options that don't require you to buy expensive fake meat. Tip number 2, second biggest impact you can make, is stop buying fast fashion. What is fast fashion? Well, actually there are a lot of good articles on that if you really want to dive into what is fast fashion. But to just give a quick explanation, it is basically anything high street. H&M, Forever 21, Zara. Basically, if you go to a mall, it's full of fast fashion. So fast fashion is produced usually outside Europe and outside America, in places where you don't have to pay people a lot. And these people live in awful conditions. They have zero rights, and they work way more than is legal and will often suffer workplace injuries from improper handling of, for example, dyes, toxic chemicals, all these things. Now these companies like H&M, they will produce a huge amount of clothing for no money, resell it for percentage-wise a huge scale up, so they earn a lot of money from you buying that cheap t-shirt, and they dump tons and tons of clothing every single year because it goes out of style. So this is such a toxic and wasteful use of fashion, and the quality is also awful. So it will break really, really quickly. Of course, we all have that magical H&M dress that's 10 years old and still looks fantastic, but in general, this is not quality stuff. So what can you do instead? Because I'm not rich, you're not rich, probably. What do? You know, we need to layer up against the cold. It's freaking January here. So what I do is I thrift everything. I have a video on here with thrifting tips, and I thrift both online and in physical stores and flea markets. My friends and I often organize clothing swaps, so we coordinate when we clear out our closets and then we come to each other's places and we swap clothing. And if you live in a country where thrift shopping isn't very popular and there aren't a lot of physical thrift stores, chances are that there are online options like Facebook groups or Depop. I talk about it more in the thrifting video. And that's a great way to live sustainably so cheap. I mean, I also thrift homeware, decorations. I just thrifted some amazing winter boots. They were practically unworn, and it's cheap. That's the thing, it's so cheap. It's cheaper than H&M. So if you thrift everything, you can occasionally splurge on some handmade, sustainable, slow fashion. And if you want some tips on good slow fashion stores that I like, you can just go to my Instagram. I always tag the brands that I like, that I wear. So you can find many stores through that. Tip number 3 is about transportation. Don't fly if you can avoid it. Of course, maybe you have to fly for work. Nothing to be done about that. But when I travel, because as I said, I don't have a lot of money. I don't go to long fancy vacations, but I love visiting my friends around Europe and going to other European cities. And taking the train there is actually such a comfortable and stress-free and cheap way to travel. So look into if maybe you can take trains or public transportation where you gotta go, or carpool. So instead of you and your friend and their friend all driving there in separate cars, see if you can go together. Also, if you are looking at buying a car, look into maybe investing in an electrical car. We have a used electrical car, and it might seem daunting and challenging and will it run out of battery? And I completely understand that it's not for everyone, but our experience is so positive, and this car can drive 350 kilometers on one charge. So it's really not as problematic as it was just a few years ago. So of course you can also bike. In Denmark we bike everywhere, and I also realized that it also depends on the country you live in, but do consider biking because it's really good for the environment, it's completely free, and it's exercise while you're getting somewhere, and that's one of the reasons I really love biking. So tip number 4, oh, I think there's a cat. A cat has entered the video. A very sustainable cat. He does not produce a lot of trash, which is what we're going to talk about now. So tip number 4 is about trash and waste management. So try to produce less trash in general. Try to not buy things that come in single-use plastics, and try to be mindful of how you sort your waste. Now, we can sort our waste in different bins already, but for example, we don't have an option to have pure plastic garbage picked up at our house. So what we do is we bought our own bin, we fill it with our plastic garbage, and then once a month we drive to the recycling area and we recycle our plastic ourselves. So be mindful of reducing garbage and also sorting garbage. And maybe if you have just a little garden area or even just a balcony, you can do a small compost. Here in Denmark we recently started to implement using food waste that would otherwise go into a compost to make green energy. So you can also look into if your country or city or area has any sort of green initiatives for how you can handle and sort your waste. Now, final tip, tip number 5, and it's sort of the motto of the sustainability movement, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. And it should be in that order, because recycling is great and all, but it requires a lot of energy and resources. So what you want to do the most is you want to reduce. Simply reduce what you consume. Do you really need these things? Do you really need this many of this one thing? You know, for example, people often think that I have a ton of clothing. And at one point I did, because I just thrifted and thrifted and thrifted and I hoarded. But for the last many years, I've had a rule that when some pieces enter my closet, I also have to go through my closet and see if I really need all of that anymore. And of course, I would never throw out clothing. I donate it, so it goes back to the cycle. And think about, you know, do I really need a new pair of shoes, or could I maybe just get new soles put on the old pair? Think about buying quality, buying a good sturdy winter coat instead of 5 sort of flimsy fashion coats that are never really warm enough, you know. Try to reduce the amount of food waste you produce, because in the Western world we tend to buy a lot of food and throw most of it out. So reduce is, that's my motto, and I always try to reduce. And the thing is, it saves you so much money. I think one of the biggest reasons I can live on my tight budget is that I have spent the last 10 years trying to reduce my consumption of everything. I remember I showed my mom my budget and she just about fainted. She said, "How can you live on that amount?" And I think that's also why people online maybe think that I have a more fancy lifestyle than I do, because in fact, I don't make a lot of money, I don't buy a lot of things, but I've reduced, and I feel like I've sort of boiled down what I need. And then of course I have built my wardrobe over the past 15 years. I have pieces that are 15 years old. And I constantly fix them, or improvement, or they get little holes, I fix that up. So you can easily, if you, like me, care about dressing up and fashion, you can totally do that while also living sustainably. So reduce is the most important. Then there's reuse. For example, there's a hole at the shoulder of your t-shirt, so you turn it into a pillowcase. Your friend doesn't want their coat anymore, you buy it from them or exchange it for something you have, maybe food. You know, you have leftover lasagna, he has a jacket he doesn't want, you know, you switch it up. So you reuse. Instead of throwing something out, you try to be creative about how to repurpose it. And then of course the last one is recycle, which is, I think a lot of people confuse reuse and recycle, because reuse is still using something, recycle is throwing it in the trash, but being mindful of where you throw it. So reduce most, reuse second, and recycle as a last opportunity. Thank you guys so much for watching this. I'm sorry it got a little long, but this is such a big topic and I really tried to narrow it down to these 5 tips, but I hope it wasn't too long, and I hope you still felt entertained, and I hope you go away from this video feeling hopeful and determined and ready to do this together. And if you cannot do a single one of these things because of your economic or social situation, then I am not here to judge you. You're watching this video, you are following me on social media. I assume you are already showing that you're interested in this. And that's really the first step. That's educating yourself. That's watching videos, reading articles, watching the news, voting for the right politicians, supporting the right companies, you know. That's so much of it. And you have already made those steps. So thank you. Thank you for asking for this video. Thank you for showing me that on a place like Instagram, which seems to be full of teeth whitener and things bought off Wish, there are a group of people who actually care about this. It warms my heart so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day.